Hey, welcome back to our special attack on Israel 1 year later. Unbelievable. Andrew Klavan, he said, I just hope Israel can save Western civilization before Western civilization can stop them. Speaking of our modern worldview today from Kamala and the rest, I want to go to the great Josh Hammer, host of America on Trial, author of the book coming out in a couple months now, but you can pre-order, Israel and Civilization, the Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Josh, great to talk to you, brother.
Mike, always great to see you. Thanks for having me.
I want to get to your book in a second, but first let's just reflect on what happened a year ago and what has happened in the year since. Where's your head at?
Well, it's hard to believe that a year has passed. It really is just, the mind reels. It feels like it were just yesterday. You know, a lot of people say that this was Israel's equivalent of 9/11. And I have mixed thoughts on that comparison. I grew up in the New York area. 9/11 was a formative event in my life. But if you want to do the apples to apples comparison, Israel's a very small country, about 9 million people. It's actually the equivalent of like 12 or 13 9/11s, if you want to play that morbid, macabre comparison. My brother-in-law, for what it's worth, lives in a town called Netivot. My wife comes from an Israeli family. My brother-in-law lives in a town called Netivot, about 5 miles from the Gaza border. I think back at a moment like this to last year during this same weekend when we had no idea for about 2 days whether he was safe, because it's actually happened over a Jewish holiday. They did it over the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah. Religious Jews still use electronics over the holiday. So it was a nightmare for our extended family, as you can probably imagine. So on a personal level, that's what I think too. On a geopolitical level, what I think too is the fact that tragically, virtually nothing has changed. If anything, what's happening on the ground right now is in some ways even more volatile than it was 1 year ago, because Israel's not just fighting a war against Hamas in Gaza. They're fighting a 7-front war, 7 different fronts. Gaza, Lebanon, Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, Syria, Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and then Iran itself, the head of the snake itself. Wow. And I get asked a lot how this ultimately ends. I don't have a good answer to that question. What I do know is that nothing is ever going to get back to normal until the head of the snake, the Iranian regime, is dealt some severe repercussions for feeding all this mayhem across the region.
Yeah. This maybe ties into your book. Why should we in America care about Israel? I can sense a lot of people being like, it's over there. I don't care about that, or I shouldn't need to care about that. Why should we care?
Yeah, so there are a few ways to answer this question, right? So, you know, J.D. Vance put it well in a speech that he gave earlier this year for the Quincy Institute. The Quincy Institute is actually a fairly pro-Iran organization. A lot of supporters of U.S.-Israel relations were like, oh my God, what is J.D. Vance doing speaking there? But he actually went to Lion's Den and gave a very forthright, realist, national interest-centric, full-throttle endorsement of tight U.S.-Israel relations. But before J.D. got to that, he made the very elementary but nonetheless salient point that, Mike, as long as America continues to be a Christian majority country, and God willing, it'll be that way for a long time, you will always have people of the book, Jews and Christians alike, who care about this narrow plot of land in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Levant. This is the Holy Land. There are holy sites here. And if for literally no other reason, if nothing else, if you are a Jew or a Christian and your religion, your faith has holy sites there, you care about the fate of those holy sites. That's probably the most simplistic reason why I think a lot of people still to this day have to care a lot. The slightly broader reason, I should say, and I say this as a so-called America First guy, I am just as anti-neoconservative as I am anti-isolationist. I hate what neoconservative foreign policy has done to America when it comes to the boondoggles in Afghanistan, Iraq. I hate it. Blood, treasure, destroyed, trillions of dollars, young lives lost. I am a realist. And as a realist, as an American, I primarily actually care about China. And I support redeploying assets from the Middle East and other troubled spots to China. That raises the question, Mike, how can the United States do that, especially in a world where we still care about the price of energy? We're still going to care about the Middle East for those reasons. We happen to have had 9/11 here. We still care about radical Islam. How can we better make sure the Middle East does not go up in flames while strategically being able to redeploy assets out of the Middle East into the Indo-Pacific? The answer is the Trump administration's foreign policy, this Abraham Accords alliance, which brings together these Iran containment countries of Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, God willing, Saudi Arabia will join. If you can use U.S. diplomacy, charismatic diplomacy, to embolden our allies to patrol their own part of the world for them, this strategically, morally, historically important part of the world, if you can do that, that will then in turn allow America to redeploy to the Far East, which is our actual civilizational threat this century.
Very well said. We're going to talk in the next segment about Christian Zionism. So I like how you started there and then went up. Let's go one more step up, and this ties more into your book. What is the connection between Israel and the West? And I started with that Klavan quote about Israel saving Western civilization. What's the connection there?
Well, in my book, which you've, generously flagged here, it's out, God willing, this March. In my book, I basically argue that Western civilization begins at Mount Sinai, that it begins with God's revelation to Moses and the ancient Israelites out at Mount Sinai, and that you cannot possibly understand what Western civilization is today unless you understand that very basic fact. I mean, when we use the term the West, a lot of people have no idea what we're actually talking about. And partially that is our own education system's fault, because we're not actually teaching some very basic things. When I use the term the West, what I personally am referring to is the broader biblical tradition, the broader biblical inheritance, the broader Judeo-Christian civilization itself. If you want to go Leo Strauss, then you can maybe say that the combination of revelation and reason, this combination between Mount Sinai and Jerusalem and Aristotle and the Greeks and all of that. But at a bare minimum, what we can all agree on is that it includes revelation, the people of the book, Jews and Christians alike. And if you just abandon the Jews, if the West abandons the Jews, you are abandoning the literal wellspring of all that Western civilization entails today. Historically, that has never ended well. There is not a single instance of a society that has ever turned its back on the Jews, that has ever pogromed the Jews, genocided the Jews, expelled the Jews, discriminated. There's not a single example of a society that has actually benefited as a result of that, which, to kind of, again, preview your segment with Christian Zionism, maybe is itself, part of the biblical prophecy that God will bless those who bless the nation of Israel and punish those who punish that. I would argue that history has actually played that out in real time there. But at a bare minimum, looking at what the West conceives itself as and thinks of itself as, I don't think there's any way that this entire edifice survives unless Jews and Christians come together to ultimately defend our shared inheritance against our three hegemonic barbaric forces that seek to destroy us, which I identify in the book as global neoliberalism, Islamism, and wokeism. Those are our three threats. The peoples of the book, the Jews and Christians alike, have to stand together to defend against those three threats.
Oh, wow. Oh, I can't. We'll do a whole hour-long special on that, on the book, and especially on that last point. That's profound. And we're going to talk about the Abrahamic covenant of Genesis 12 coming up in just a few minutes. What then is the Kamala Harris worldview? And this really is not a political special, but we have to chat about this a little bit. What's the Kamala worldview when it comes to Israel?
I think it's very troubling to the extent that we can discern any kind of coherent worldview at all, which is a very debatable proposition. There's not really a whole lot that we're even able to discern there. Look, I think that the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz foreign policy is basically the exact same foreign policy of the Biden-Harris administration, which is the exact same foreign policy as the Obama-Biden administration that preceded it. For roughly a half century, America had a bipartisan foreign policy consensus, which is that we generally want to support, all else equal, in the Middle East, Israel and the perceived more moderate Sunni Arab states. That means countries like Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, especially in recent years, Saudi Arabia, now that they have disavowed Islamism. The Obama administration starts to take that and flips it entirely on its head. They deliberately seek to create daylight, that's their literal word, to create daylight with Israel, and then they embolden Israel and the Sunni Arab state's arch enemy, which is Iran. They flip the entire thing on its head in this totally overly academic, overly theorized thing to try to balance out interests and allow America to get out of the region. So they did that. That was the whole point of the Iran nuclear deal. Donald Trump, to his great credit, totally did the opposite, pulled out of the nuclear deal, warmed this back up to Israel, to the Saudis. That's how we got the Abraham Accords. That's how we got peace and stability. The Kamala Harris approach would just be right back to the same failed Barack Obama, Joe Biden paradigm, which, contrary to what they tell you, would actually only lead to more chaos, more jihad, and more war.
We only got 90 seconds. I want to make sure I understand this right. What was the play with Obama and now moving forward, Kamala, with Iran? Like, what was their, let's give them the benefit of the doubt here, right? Let's steel man their argument. What were they going for?
Yeah. So the most charitable I can possibly be, to the extent that we are not ascribing this to evil or outright malice, which is what I usually do. But if we're trying to be the most charitable possible, I think what the game plan was to say, okay, America is too involved in the Middle East, which, by the way, I agree with. That's what I was saying earlier about doing this to all get our guys out of there to the Indo-Pacific. But I guess from their perspective, they're saying, okay, we're too bogged down in the Middle East. The way to get us out is to balance out these two clashing lines of this divide. So we've gone too far all in for one side. That's the Israel and the moderate Sunni states, Egypt, Saudi, Emirati, and so forth. So on the other side of the ledger, now it's time to embolden the other guys. So namely Iran, Qatar, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay. That's how you got the Obama administration supporting the Arab Spring in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia. You had the failed intervention of Gaddafi in Libya in 2011. It all kind of comes back to this balancing out of strategic interests. To say that this has failed, Mike, I think would be a catastrophic understatement.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay, very good. When's the book come out, Josh?
It's coming out in March 25th, God willing. It's now available for pre-sale on Amazon.com and everywhere else you get your books as well.
Great. It's called Israel and Civilization, Fate of the Jewish Nation, Destiny of the West. Good to talk to you, Josh. Appreciate it.
You bet.